In March 2023, construction workers breaking ground for a geothermal energy plant in the Austrian Alps, 40 miles southeast of Innsbruck, struck something unusual at 85 feet below the surface. The excavator blade hit reinforced concrete where geological surveys had indicated only rock and soil. When engineers investigated, they discovered a sealed concrete structure measuring approximately 150 feet long by 80 feet wide, buried deliberately beneath layers of compacted earth and stone. The Austrian Federal Monuments Office dispatched archaeologists on March 28th. What they found was a stairwell descending another 30 feet into bedrock, leading to a series of underground chambers built with precision German engineering. Steel doors, corroded but intact, sealed off laboratory rooms equipped with ventilation systems, electrical conduits still mounted on walls, and water-resistant cement that had kept the interior remarkably dry for nearly 8 decades. In the largest chamber, investigators discovered something that would rewrite what historians thought they knew about Nazi scientific programs. A laboratory, fully equipped, abandoned but preserved. Workbenches lined the walls, glass cabinets still holding chemical reagents in sealed containers, centrifuges, microscopes, and a wall-mounted blackboard covered with complex mathematical equations written in German. The equations were still legible, barely faded after 78 years in sealed darkness. But the discovery that made international headlines was found in a steel safe hidden behind a false wall panel. Inside were 23 leather-bound research journals, meticulously documented experiments spanning from 1943 to 1952, and a single personnel document identifying the facility's director, Dr. Friedrich Wilhelm Krause, senior research chemist, SS Sturmbannführer, last officially seen in Berlin, April 1945. Allied intelligence files from 1945 list Krause among thousands of Nazi officials who disappeared during Germany's collapse. He was never captured, never tried, and officially presumed dead in the war's final chaos. Except these journals, written in his handwriting and containing his signature on every page, documented 9 years of continued research conducted from this hidden Austrian facility, long after the Third Reich fell. The final journal entry, dated October 14, 1952, reads, "Research concluded, facility sealed, relocating to secondary site, all documentation preserved for future scientific value. The work must continue, regardless of politics." If you want to see what investigators found inside those research journals, how Krause built and maintained a secret laboratory for nearly a decade, and where the evidence trail finally led, hit the like button and subscribe, because the documents recovered from that underground facility reveal one of the most elaborate disappearances in post-war history and scientific work that preceded modern breakthroughs by decades. Now back to Berlin, April 1945, where Dr. Krause was supposedly preparing to evacuate with other German officials. The official record says he vanished in the chaos. The Austrian facility tells a completely different story. Dr. Friedrich Wilhelm Krause was born in Dresden on March 12, 1908, into an academic family. His father taught organic chemistry at Dresden Technical University. His mother was a pharmacist. From childhood, Friedrich showed exceptional aptitude for sciences, particularly chemistry and mathematics. He completed his doctorate at the University of Berlin in 1932, aged 24, with a dissertation on synthetic polymer compounds that received academic recognition across European scientific circles. His early career was conventional. He worked as a research chemist for IG Farben, Germany's largest chemical conglomerate, from 1932 to 1938, focusing on industrial applications of synthetic materials. His personnel file, declassified by German Federal Archives in 2001, shows a brilliant but unremarkable researcher, publishing papers on rubber synthesis and plastic compounds, earning modest recognition in academic journals. Everything changed in 1938. The Nazi regime, expanding military research programs, recruited scientists with expertise in chemistry, physics, and engineering. Krause was approached by the SS in June 1938 and offered a position in a classified research program. His file doesn't specify what motivated his acceptance: ideological alignment, ambition, career pressure. But by August 1938, he joined the SS with the rank of Hauptsturmführer, captain, and began working at a research facility outside Munich. Krause's wartime work remained classified until partial declassification in the 1990s revealed he'd been involved in chemical weapons research, specifically developing more stable formulations of existing agents and exploring new synthetic compounds. His work wasn't directly involved in the Holocaust's atrocities. He wasn't stationed at concentration camps, but his research supported Germany's military objectives and was conducted within the SS infrastructure that committed those crimes. What made Krause valuable wasn't just his chemistry expertise, but his interdisciplinary knowledge. He'd studied engineering principles, understood industrial production processes, and had practical experience scaling laboratory research to manufacturing. By 1942, he'd been promoted to Sturmbannführer Major and appointed director of a small research facility near Innsbruck, Austria, designated Research Station Alpine 7, focused on cold weather applications of chemical compounds and materials science. Research Station Alpine 7 employed 23 scientists and support staff between 1942 and 1945. The facility's work, according to declassified documents, involved testing chemical stability in extreme cold, developing winter camouflage materials, and researching preservation techniques for medical supplies in freezing conditions. Legitimate military research, though conducted under morally compromised authority. Krause's personal life was minimal. He married briefly in 1935, divorced in 1937, no children. His parents died in Allied bombing raids in 1944. He had one sister, Anna, who worked as a nurse in Vienna. His personnel file describes him as dedicated, methodical, emotionally reserved, focused entirely on his research to the exclusion of social connections. By early 1945, Krause recognized Germany's inevitable defeat. Unlike many Nazi officials who remained delusional about victory, scientists like Krause saw the reality. Collapsing infrastructure, advancing Allied forces, destroyed laboratories, confiscated research, and probable prosecution. His SS rank and involvement in military research made him a target for Allied war crimes investigators, even though his specific work didn't constitute prosecutable atrocities. Intelligence reports from April 1945, now declassified, show Allied forces specifically targeted German research facilities, seeking to capture scientists, secure research documentation, and prevent Nazi officials from escaping. The Americans and Soviets both operated programs to recruit German scientists, Operation Paperclip being the most famous, but recruitment was selective. Scientists involved in weapons development faced scrutiny, and those with SS affiliations faced probable rejection or prosecution. Krause's situation was precarious. His research had military value, but his SS rank created liability. Unlike rocket scientists like Wernher von Braun, whose work was strategically critical enough to overlook Nazi Party membership, Krause's chemical research was valuable but not irreplaceable. He likely calculated his chances of recruitment versus prosecution and decided neither option was acceptable. Between January and April 1945, while Allied forces closed in, Krause began preparing something extraordinary. He started transferring research documentation from Research Station Alpine 7, creating duplicate copies of his most important work, and secretly stockpiling equipment and materials. His plan wasn't to surrender or flee abroad, but to disappear and continue his research independently. hidden from both Allied authorities and the collapsing Nazi regime. April 20th, 1945. Soviet forces are 50 miles from Berlin. American forces have crossed the Rhine. Austria is days away from liberation. Research Station Alpine 7 receives orders to evacuate, destroy classified materials, and relocate personnel to a southern facility. Kraus acknowledges the order but implements his own plan instead. Over 3 nights, April 21st to 23rd, Kraus and 4 trusted colleagues systematically removed equipment, chemicals, research documents, and supplies from the facility, transporting them to a location Kraus had been preparing since February, an abandoned mining complex in the mountains 40 miles southeast of Innsbruck, near the small village of Obertauern. The site was perfect, an old copper mine last operated in 1918, with a network of tunnels extending 200 feet into the mountainside. The entrance had collapsed partially in the 1920s, leaving it forgotten and unmapped. Kraus had discovered it during a 1943 field research trip and immediately recognized its potential. Deep enough to avoid detection, structurally sound, remote, accessible only by a difficult mountain trail. Between February and April 1945, using supplies diverted from Research Station Alpine 7 and purchased through black market contacts, Kraus covertly prepared the mine as a secret laboratory. He installed electrical generators, ventilation systems, water filtration equipment, constructed laboratory benches, storage cabinets, and living quarters, all while maintaining his duties at the official facility. On April 25, 1945, Research Station Alpine 7 was evacuated according to orders. Most personnel relocated to the southern facility as directed. Kraus officially departed with them, carrying falsified transfer papers showing he was being reassigned to a facility near Munich. In reality, he and his 4 collaborators, Dr. Hans Reichmann, physicist, Dr. Elsa Vogel, biologist, Ing. Otto Lindemann, engineer, and lab technician Walter Hoffmann, diverted to the abandoned mine and disappeared. Allied forces liberated Innsbruck on May 3, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8. Research Station Alpine 7 was secured by American forces on May 10. An inventory found the facility mostly emptied, equipment removed, documents burned. Investigators questioned remaining staff, who testified that Kraus had left on April 25 heading to Munich. Nobody mentioned the abandoned mine or knew of Kraus's plan. American intelligence added Kraus to the list of missing Nazi officials. His name appeared on wanted lists circulated through occupied Germany and Austria. Investigators searched for months, interviewing his former colleagues and checking records of captured SS personnel. They found nothing. Friedrich Wilhelm Kraus had vanished completely. The official presumption, killed in the war's final chaos, hiding under a false identity, or fled to South America through rat lines that smuggled Nazi officials abroad. For 78 years, historians assumed one of those explanations. None suspected the truth. Kraus hadn't fled. He'd simply moved 40 miles away and continued his research in perfect secrecy. The abandoned copper mine near Obertauern sits at 5,800 feet elevation in the Niedertauern mountain range. The area is remote even today, accessible only by narrow mountain roads that become impassable in winter. In 1945, it was virtually isolated. The nearest village, Obertauern, had perhaps 200 residents, mostly elderly or families of men fighting in the war. Nobody paid attention to the old mine entrance, hidden among pine forests and rock outcroppings. Kraus's preparation had been meticulous. Between February and April 1945, he'd made 17 trips to the site, each time transporting supplies in a small truck borrowed from Research Station Alpine 7 under pretense of field research. The trips were logged as material testing expeditions in official records, providing perfect cover. By April 1945, the underground facility was operational. The main tunnel extended 180 feet into the mountain, branching into 6 chambers that Kraus had reinforced with timber supports and concrete. Chamber 1, laboratory workspace with benches, glassware, chemical storage, and analytical equipment. Chamber 2, library and documentation room, housing research journals, reference books, and filed notes. Chamber 3, living quarters with bunks, a small kitchen area, and storage for food supplies. Chamber 4, mechanical and electrical systems, generators, ventilation pumps, water filtration, and battery banks. Chamber 5, additional storage for equipment, spare parts, and materials. Chamber 6, a workshop for equipment repair and fabrication. The electrical system was ingenious. Kraus couldn't connect to the regional power grid without detection, so he installed 3 diesel generators scavenged from military surplus, hidden in a ventilated chamber that exhausted smoke through a concealed chimney disguised as natural rock venting. The generators provided enough power for lighting, equipment operation, and ventilation fans. Fuel was stockpiled in sealed drums, enough for months of operation. Water came from an underground spring that fed into the old mine tunnels, naturally filtered through limestone, clean enough for laboratory use after basic treatment. Food supplies were stockpiled non-perishable goods purchased through black market contacts in Innsbruck and Salzburg during early 1945, when rationing was collapsing and goods were available for the right price. The team consisted of 5 people: Dr. Friedrich Kraus, age 37, director and senior chemist; Dr. Hans Reichmann, age 42, physicist specializing in thermodynamics and materials science; Dr. Elsa Vogel, age 34, biologist with expertise in biochemistry and cellular processes; Otto Lindemann, age 45, mechanical engineer responsible for maintaining equipment and infrastructure; Walter Hoffmann, age 29, laboratory technician skilled in chemical synthesis and practical lab operations. Why did they follow Kraus into hiding? Each had their reasons. Reichmann was Jewish, had hidden his background by falsifying documents in 1938, and faced dual danger from Nazi authorities if discovered and Allied investigators who might not believe his coercion defense. Vogel had been involved in human tissue research, ethically questionable even if not directly criminal, and feared prosecution. Lindemann was a dedicated engineer who believed the research had value beyond politics. Hoffmann was simply loyal to Kraus, who'd been his mentor since 1943. The group entered the facility on April 26, 1945, and sealed the entrance behind them. Using explosives, they collapsed part of the tunnel entrance, making it appear naturally unstable and discouraging casual exploration. A concealed secondary entrance, hidden behind a rockfall 200 feet away, provided their actual access point, camouflaged with brush and only detectable by someone who knew exactly where to look. For the first months, they remained completely isolated. The war ended on May 8th. Allied forces occupied Austria. American troops conducted searches for Nazi fugitives throughout the region. The team stayed underground, ventured out only at night for brief reconnaissance, and maintained absolute silence during daylight hours when hikers or military patrols might pass nearby. Supply acquisition was the critical challenge. Their stockpiled food would last perhaps 6 months. After that, they needed resupply without revealing their presence. Kraus solved this through careful planning and an accomplice network. Before disappearing, Kraus had recruited 3 civilian contacts in the region: Johann Mayer, a farmer near Obertauern who sympathized with German nationalism and disliked Allied occupation; Franz Gruber, a black market smuggler operating between Austria and Italy; and Kraus's sister Anna, who worked as a nurse in Vienna and could access medical supplies. The arrangement was simple. Mayer would leave supply packages at a dead drop location, a hollowed tree stump on his property, once per month. Gruber would obtain specialized chemicals, equipment parts, and technical materials through black market networks. Anna would provide medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, and news from the outside world. None of the 3 knew the facility's exact location. They left supplies at designated drop points, and Krause's team retrieved them during nighttime excursions. Payment came from resources Krause had accumulated during the war. He'd converted research budget funds into gold coins and gemstones, standard practice among SS officers who anticipated Germany's collapse. By April 1945, he possessed approximately 15 kilograms of gold and various valuables, enough to fund his operation for years at 1945 black market prices. The system worked. Between May 1945 and late 1946, the team lived in complete isolation, maintained their equipment, and continued research. But eventually, isolation became unsustainable. In November 1946, Krause made a calculated risk: selective reemergence. Using forged identity documents prepared before the war's end, Dr. Friedrich Krause became Hermann Vogel, a civilian chemist with fabricated work history in a non-existent industrial firm. The documents were professional quality, produced by a forger Krause had contacted through Gruber, complete with employment records, residential registration, and reference letters. As Hermann Vogel, Krause surfaced in Salzburg in December 1946, registering with local authorities as a refugee from Czechoslovakia seeking work. Austria was flooded with displaced persons in 1946, and Allied authorities were overwhelmed processing thousands of refugees. Hermann Vogel's documents passed cursory inspection. He was registered, issued ration cards, and allowed to settle in Salzburg. This gave Krause legal identity and access to the open economy. He could purchase supplies openly, correspond through postal services, and interact with the rebuilding Austrian society, all while maintaining the hidden facility. He spent weekdays in Salzburg, maintaining his cover identity, and returned to the mountain laboratory on weekends, ostensibly hiking trips. The other team members adopted similar strategies over the next year. Reichmann became Klaus Steiner, engineer. Vogel became Maria Hoffmann, librarian. Lindemann used his real name. He'd never officially joined the SS and faced no war crimes risk. Hoffmann became Johann Beck, mechanic. By late 1947, all five had established legal identities and could move freely in post-war Austria. This dual existence, legitimate civilian life combined with secret research facility, continued for years. The team maintained the laboratory, conducted experiments, documented findings, and lived seemingly normal lives in Austrian society. Krause even took a job in 1948 as a quality control chemist at a pharmaceutical company in Salzburg, work that provided additional income and access to chemical supplies. Allied war crimes investigations gradually wound down through the late 1940s. The focus shifted from prosecuting every former Nazi official to rebuilding Europe and confronting the Soviet threat. Minor figures like Krause, who weren't directly implicated in atrocities and hadn't been captured immediately, faded from priority lists. By 1950, Hermann Vogel lived without fear of exposure. But what was Krause actually researching in his hidden laboratory? And why continue work that served no military purpose after Germany's defeat? The journals recovered in 2023 provide the answer, and it's more complex than simple Nazi fanaticism. The 23 research journals found in the Austrian facility span from July 1943 to October 1952. The first 6 volumes document Krause's work at Research Station Alpine 7 before Germany's collapse, official military research on cold weather chemical stability, synthetic materials, and preservation techniques. The remaining 17 volumes, dated from May 1945 to October 1952, document his independent research conducted in the hidden facility. The content reveals Krause's evolution from military researcher to independent scientist pursuing work for its own sake, unbound by military objectives or ethical oversight. The research falls into 3 categories, each raising different questions about his motivations and the scientific value of his work. The earliest post-war journals focus on synthetic polymer research, extending Krause's pre-war work at IG Farben. He experimented with creating new plastic compounds using available chemicals, testing their properties, heat resistance, flexibility, chemical stability, and documenting molecular structures. This work was scientifically legitimate and surprisingly advanced. Several compounds Krause synthesized in his makeshift laboratory closely resembled polymers that wouldn't be commercially developed until the 1960s. One journal entry from March 1946 describes a synthesis process producing a flexible, heat-resistant polymer that matches the characteristics of polyethylethylketone PEEK, a high-performance plastic not commercially introduced until 1978. Krause's notes show he understood the compound's potential applications: medical implants, aerospace components, industrial seals, but lacked the resources to develop them beyond laboratory samples. Another entry from August 1947 documents a polymer formulation nearly identical to Kevlar, the synthetic fiber patented by DuPont in 1965. Krause created small fiber samples, tested their tensile strength, and noted remarkable results. Fiber shows resistance to cutting and tearing far exceeding natural or synthetic materials currently available. Potential applications in protective equipment, structural reinforcement. Modern chemists who have reviewed these journals express astonishment. Dr. Alina Hartmann, materials scientist at ETH Zurich, stated in a 2023 interview, Krause was conducting research that preceded commercial breakthroughs by 20 to 30 years. With limited equipment and resources, he synthesized compounds that required sophisticated industrial processes to produce commercially. It's genuinely impressive and deeply troubling given the context. The middle journal's shift focused to biochemistry and preservation techniques. Krause became interested in extending the viability of biological materials, specifically human blood, tissue samples, and cellular cultures. This research likely stemmed from his wartime work on preserving medical supplies in cold conditions, but evolved into something more ambitious: understanding the biochemical processes of cellular degradation and developing methods to prevent it. Entries from this period describe experiments with cryogenic preservation, chemical stabilizers, and cellular metabolism manipulation. Krause worked with tissue samples, source unspecified but likely animal tissues from hunting or purchased from butchers, testing various preservation methods and documenting cellular integrity over time. One particularly detailed series of experiments from June 1949 describes a preservation solution containing dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO, glycerol, and several proprietary compounds. Krause froze tissue samples in this solution, stored them for months, then thawed and analyzed cellular viability. His results showed significant success. Cells remained viable after prolonged freezing, a technique predating modern cryopreservation methods developed in the 1960s and 70s. The ethical implications are darker here. Some entries suggest Krause was working with human tissue samples, though he never explicitly states their source. References to subject A, B, C, and descriptions of tissue characteristics consistent with human biology raise disturbing questions. Where did these samples come from? Was Krause maintaining contact with former colleagues who provided materials? Was he conducting experiments that would be illegal under any ethical framework? The journals don't answer these questions directly, but the research clearly pushed ethical boundaries. Modern bioethicists reviewing the documents note that while the scientific techniques are valid, the apparent lack of ethical oversight and sourcing transparency make this work morally compromised, regardless of its technical merit. The final journals, covering 1950 to 1952, represent Krause's most controversial work. He became fascinated with neurochemistry, the chemical processes governing brain function, memory, and cognition. This research was highly speculative, far beyond the scientific understanding of the era, and involved experiments that would be absolutely prohibited under modern ethical standards. Krause's hypothesis, outlined in a January 1950 journal entry, memory and cognitive function are fundamentally chemical processes. If we understand the molecular mechanisms of memory formation and retrieval, we can enhance, preserve, or even transfer these processes. The implications are profound. He began experimenting with various chemical compounds, testing their effects on neural tissue from animal subjects. The entries describe detailed dissections, chemical treatments, and observations of tissue responses. Some compounds showed promise in preserving neural tissue integrity. Others appeared to enhance certain biochemical markers associated with synaptic function. By 1951, Krause's research took a more disturbing turn. He began referencing human subject observations, though again, the source of these observations is unclear. Was he conducting unethical experiments on human subjects? Was he analyzing medical data obtained through questionable means? The journals use deliberately vague language, but several entries strongly suggest improper human experimentation. One entry from March 1951 describes administering an unspecified compound to subject H and observing enhanced memory recall during cognitive testing. Another entry from July 1951 mentions subject K experiencing adverse neurological reactions requiring medical intervention. These descriptions imply direct human testing of experimental neurochemicals, experiments that would constitute serious ethical violations and criminal activity. The research never reached conclusive results. Krause's final entries from 1952 express frustration with limited resources, inability to conduct proper controlled studies, and recognition that his work required infrastructure beyond what a hidden laboratory could provide. The October 1952 entry that ends the journal states, "Current facility insufficient for continued research at necessary scale, relocating to more suitable environment." These journals preserved as documentation of preliminary findings. Modern neuroscientists reviewing these documents have mixed reactions. The research shows genuine insight into biochemical processes that wouldn't be fully understood for decades, but the apparent ethical violations, human experimentation without consent, use of questionable methods, overshadow any scientific merit. Dr. Michael Brenner, neuroscience researcher at University of Vienna, commented, "Krause was asking the right questions, but his methods were unacceptable." Some of his hypotheses about memory and cognition have been validated by modern research, but that doesn't excuse conducting experiments that clearly violated human rights. Beyond the scientific content, the journals reveal Krause's psychological state over 7 years of isolation and secret work. Early entries are methodical and emotionally detached. Later entries show increasing frustration, philosophical reflections on the nature of scientific progress, and hints of paranoia about discovery. A February 1952 entry reads, "Science exists independent of politics, morality, or social approval. The pursuit of knowledge is its own justification. History will judge the value of this work separate from the circumstances of its creation." That statement encapsulates Krause's mindset. He believed his research had intrinsic value regardless of how or why it was conducted. Whether that belief justified his actions or simply rationalized unethical behavior remains debated by historians and ethicists analyzing the case. The facility remained hidden for 78 years because nobody was looking. After Allied investigations concluded in the early 1950s, Friedrich Wilhelm Krause was a closed case, presumed dead or successfully disappeared. The old copper mine near Obertauern was forgotten, unmapped in modern geological surveys, and located in terrain too rugged for casual exploration. The site might have stayed hidden indefinitely, except for Austria's 2020s push toward renewable energy. In 2022, the Austrian government approved construction of a geothermal power plant near Obertauern, part of a national initiative to reduce fossil fuel dependence. The site was selected based on geological surveys indicating suitable underground heat sources at accessible depths. Construction began in February 2023. The initial phase involved excavating foundations and drilling exploratory boreholes to confirm geothermal resource viability. On March 19th, an excavation crew working 85 feet below the surface hit unexpected resistance. The excavator blade struck concrete, a material that shouldn't exist at that depth in that location. Site engineers initially assumed it was construction debris or old infrastructure from a forgotten building project. But when they cleared surrounding earth, they discovered a concrete structure, walls 18 inches thick, reinforced with steel rebar, extending beyond the excavation area. This was no accidental construction debris. It was a deliberate, engineered structure buried intentionally. Work halted on March 21st while the construction company contacted local authorities. The Austrian Federal Monuments Office, responsible for archaeological sites and historical preservation, dispatched a team on March 28th. The team included archaeologists, structural engineers, and historical researchers. Excavation around the concrete structure revealed it was actually the roof of a subterranean complex. Further digging exposed a stairwell descending into bedrock, sealed with a steel door corroded but intact. The door bore no markings, no identification, nothing indicating its origin or purpose. On April 3, 2023, the team opened the door using cutting equipment. Behind it, stairs descended 30 feet into darkness. Portable lights revealed a tunnel carved into solid rock, walls reinforced with concrete, floor paved with stone slabs. The tunnel extended 180 feet into the mountain, branching into multiple chambers. The first chamber they entered was unmistakably a laboratory. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with dust but structurally intact. Glass beakers, flasks, and test tubes stood on shelves, many still containing dried chemical residues. A periodic table poster hung on the wall, printed in German. Electrical wiring ran along the ceiling, connected to light fixtures that no longer functioned. Ventilation ducts, now inactive, led deeper into the complex. The preservation was remarkable. The sealed environment had protected the facility from weather, moisture, and biological decay. Equipment was corroded and non-functional, but structurally intact. Documents stored in sealed containers remained readable. The site was a time capsule, frozen in October 1952 when it was last occupied. Over the next 2 weeks, April 3rd to 18th, investigators systematically explored and cataloged the entire complex. They found 6 chambers, each revealing more about the facility's purpose and its occupants. The largest space, approximately 60 feet by 30 feet, contained 2 long workbenches equipped with chemical glassware, Bunsen burners, analytical balances, and storage cabinets filled with reagent bottles. Many chemicals had degraded over 70 years, but labels were still legible, showing a wide range of organic and inorganic compounds. A blackboard mounted on the wall displayed chemical equations, still visible beneath decades of dust. The equations dealt with polymer synthesis, complex organic reactions that archaeologists photographed for later analysis by chemists. This smaller chamber, perhaps 30 feet by 20 feet, contained metal filing cabinets, bookshelves, and a desk with a typewriter. The filing cabinets held thousands of pages of documents, research notes, correspondence, supply inventories, and personal records. The bookshelves held scientific reference books, journals, and manuals, many in German, dating from 1930s through 1945. And most significantly, the desk drawer contained 23 leather-bound research journals, each approximately 200 pages, filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, and experimental data. This chamber showed the facility wasn't just a laboratory but a residence. 5 bunk beds, a small kitchen area with a wood-burning stove, a table with chairs, and personal lockers. The lockers contained clothing, personal items including a pocket watch, eyeglasses, photographs, and identification documents. The photographs showed people in laboratory coats, posed in what appeared to be the very laboratory where investigators now stood. The identification documents, however, were the key discovery. This chamber housed 3 diesel generators, now rusted solid, connected to a complex system of batteries, voltage regulators, and distribution panels. Ventilation fans, water pumps, and filtration equipment filled the space. Fuel drums, empty but bearing German military markings, were stacked along one wall. The engineering was sophisticated, designed to provide reliable power and ventilation for extended operation without external connections. Shelves and cabinets filled with equipment, spare parts, tools, and materials. Chemical supplies, glassware, mechanical components, even spare clothing and food containers. An inventory list tacked to the wall, dated August 1947, cataloged hundreds of items in meticulous German script. A smaller room equipped with machinist tools, a lathe, drill press, and welding equipment. This was where the team maintained and fabricated equipment, enabling them to repair broken instruments and create specialized apparatus for their experiments. The critical discovery came on April 12, when forensic investigators examined the documents found in the living quarters. Among personal effects, they found a German military identity book belonging to SS Sturmbannführer Dr. Friedrich Wilhelm Krause, complete with photograph, signature, and service record. The photograph matched the man in several of the recovered photographs. Cross-referencing the name with historical databases immediately flagged him as a wanted Nazi official, missing since 1945, associated with Research Station Alpine 7, and never apprehended. But here was his identification, found in an underground facility that clearly operated for years after the war. The research journals underwent immediate forensic analysis. Paper dating using radiocarbon methods confirmed the journals were created between 1943 and 1952. Ink analysis matched German military issue ink from the 1940s. Handwriting comparison, conducted using Krause's wartime documents from German archives, showed a 97% probability match. The journals were genuine, written by Friedrich Wilhelm Krause himself. The Austrian government classified the site as a protected historical location on April 20th and restricted access. An international investigation team formed, including Austrian Federal Criminal Police, German Federal Archives representatives, historians specializing in Nazi research programs, and forensic experts. The journal's content caused immediate controversy. Scientists reviewing the research notes recognized advanced work in polymer chemistry, biochemistry, and neurochemistry. Some entries described experiments and techniques that preceded publicly known scientific developments by decades. But the apparent ethical violations, especially the later neurochemistry research, raised serious concerns. One particular journal passage generated intense debate. An entry from June 1951 read, "Subject H, male, age 34, administered compound 7B at 50 mg dosage. Cognitive testing shows 23% improvement in memory recall tests compared to baseline. Subject reports enhanced clarity of distant memories, childhood events recalled in greater detail. No adverse physical effects observed during 72-hour monitoring period. Further testing required to establish long-term safety profile." This entry appeared to describe human drug testing, conducted without ethical oversight, regulatory approval, or informed consent. Modern medical ethicists analyzing the journals concluded that Krause had almost certainly conducted illegal human experiments in his hidden laboratory, experiments that would constitute serious criminal violations under any legal framework. But who were these subjects? Where did they come from? The journals never identify them beyond letters and basic demographics. Investigators developed several theories: willing participants, possibly friends or accomplices who volunteered for experiments; Coerced subjects, people threatened or pressured into participation. Unknowing subjects, individuals who received compounds without their knowledge or consent. None of these theories could be confirmed. No additional evidence at the site identified the subjects. Medical records from the era didn't survive or weren't accessible. Any living witnesses would be in their 90s or 100s by 2023, and none came forward after news of the discovery broke. The identity documents found at the site revealed another critical piece of the puzzle. Besides Krause's SS identification, investigators found documents for 4 other individuals: Dr. Hans Reichmann, Dr. Elsa Vogel, Eying, Otto Lindemann, and Walter Hoffmann. All had worked at Research Station Alpine 7 with Krause. All disappeared in April 1945, and all, according to their personal effects found in the living quarters, had lived in this facility together for years. DNA analysis was conducted on personal items, hair from brushes, saliva traces on cups, biological material from clothing. The DNA profiles were compared to descendant databases of people with German ancestry. 2 matches came back positive. Hans Reichmann's daughter, now 87, living in Berlin, provided a DNA sample that matched material recovered from the facility. Elsa Vogel's nephew, age 73, living in Vienna, also matched. Both descendants had believed their relatives died during the war. Learning they'd survived and lived in hiding for years was shocking revelations. Piecing together what happened at the facility between 1945 and 1952 required combining evidence from multiple sources: the research journals, personal documents, forensic analysis of the site, and historical records from post-war Austria. The timeline began in February 1945 when Krause, recognizing Germany's inevitable collapse, started preparing the abandoned mine as a refuge. Using his position at Research Station Alpine 7, he diverted supplies, equipment, and materials to the hidden site over 3 months. His 4 colleagues, Reichmann, Vogel, Lindemann, and Hoffmann, assisted, each having their own reasons to disappear rather than face Allied occupation. On April 25, 1945, as Research Station Alpine 7 was being evacuated, the 5 disappeared. They sealed themselves in the underground facility with enough supplies to survive months in complete isolation. During the war's final days and the immediate post-war chaos, they remained hidden, emerging only briefly at night to monitor the situation. By late 1946, with Allied investigations winding down and post-war Austria stabilizing, Krause made the calculated decision to create false identities and re-emerge into society. This dual existence, legitimate civilian life combined with secret research facility, allowed the team to access supplies, information, and resources while maintaining their hidden laboratory. The facility operated as a functional research laboratory from 1945 to 1952, nearly 7 years of continuous scientific work conducted outside any official framework, ethical oversight, or regulatory control. The team's motivation evolved over time. Initially, they were simply hiding, avoiding prosecution, and surviving in post-war chaos. But as years passed, the research itself became the purpose. Krause, freed from military objectives and ethical constraints, pursued scientific questions that fascinated him, regardless of practical applications or moral implications. His colleagues, similarly isolated and committed to the work, enabled and participated in increasingly questionable experiments. Financial support came from multiple sources. Krause's stockpiled gold and valuables funded initial operations. His civilian job as a chemist in Salzburg provided legitimate income. Black market contacts, maintained through intermediaries like Franz Gruber, supplied specialized materials. And gradually, the team established connections with other ex-Nazi scientists living in hiding or under false identities, an informal network that shared information and resources. This network, referenced cryptically in several journal entries and correspondence found at the site, appears to have been more extensive than initially suspected. Letters found in the documentation room suggest Kraus corresponded with at least 8 other former Nazi scientists between 1947 and 1952, using coded language and mail drops to avoid detection. These scientists, scattered across Austria, Germany, and South America, shared research findings, discussed scientific problems, and provided mutual support. One letter from October 1949, signed only WM and postmarked from Innsbruck, discusses progress on the protein synthesis problem we discussed last year, and requests any insights you've gained from your work on cellular preservation. Another letter from March 1950, signed EK, with an Argentine postmark, mentions successfully establishing facility here, and equipment you requested is being shipped via usual channels. This suggests Kraus's hidden laboratory wasn't an isolated anomaly, but part of a broader network of former Nazi scientists who continued research independently after the war, operating outside official structures and sharing information through covert channels. The full extent of this network remains unknown. Investigators are still working to identify the correspondence and locate other potential facilities. The facility's operations continued successfully until 1952. Why did Kraus decide to shut down and relocate? The journal's final entries provide clues. By 1952, several factors made continued operation untenable. Equipment was aging and increasingly difficult to repair. Chemical supplies were becoming harder to obtain as black market networks dissolved. The risk of discovery, while still low, was increasing as Austrian authorities stabilized and implemented better record-keeping. More significantly, Kraus had reached the limits of what he could accomplish with limited resources. His neurochemistry research required sophisticated equipment, extensive human trials, and analytical capabilities beyond what his makeshift laboratory could provide. To continue advancing his work, he needed to relocate to a more sophisticated facility or somehow integrate into legitimate research institutions. The October 14, 1952 journal entry, the last in the series, states, "Research concluded, facility sealed, relocating to secondary site, all documentation preserved for future scientific value. The work must continue, regardless of politics." The phrase secondary site suggests Kraus had another facility prepared, location unknown. All documentation preserved indicates he took research materials with him, leaving only the journals and equipment behind. And the work must continue reflects his belief that his research had value transcending its questionable origins. What happened next? Where did Kraus go? This is where the trail becomes murky. Hermann Vogel, Kraus's false identity, appears in Austrian records through 1954. He maintained his job at the pharmaceutical company in Salzburg, lived in a modest apartment, and outwardly appeared to be an ordinary civilian chemist. But after March 1954, Hermann Vogel vanishes from records. He doesn't die officially. He simply stops appearing in employment records, tax documents, or residential registrations. Investigators in 2023-02 attempted to track Kraus's movements after 1954. They found fragmentary evidence suggesting he left Austria, possibly relocating to South America, where several former Nazi officials had established communities. Argentine immigration records from 1954, partially declassified in 2018, include an entry for a Hermann Vogel, chemist, Austrian national, arriving in Buenos Aires on April 12, 1954. No photograph survives in the records, and the identification documents used for entry weren't preserved. But the timing matches Kraus's disappearance from Austria. If this was Kraus, he would have been 46 years old in 1954, still in his professional prime, with decades of potential research ahead. Argentine had a significant German expatriate community, including several former Nazi scientists and officials living under legal or illegal protection. Argentina didn't actively cooperate with Nazi hunters during the 1950s, making it a relatively safe haven. Additional evidence comes from a letter found in Krause's sister Anna's personal effects after her death in 1978. Anna, who'd provided supplies and assistance during Krause's hidden years, had maintained correspondence with her brother through the 1950s. Among her papers, donated to a Vienna archive in 1982, was a letter dated July 1956, postmarked from Bariloche, Argentina, signed "Your Brother." The letter, written in German with no explicit names, discusses settling into new surroundings, establishing connections with like-minded colleagues, and resuming important work under more favorable conditions. It makes no specific mention of research or scientific work, but the phrasing strongly suggests the writer was continuing some form of professional activity. Bariloche, a city in Argentina's Patagonia region, was known for its German expatriate community during the post-war period. Several Nazi officials, including Erich Priebke and Joseph Mengele at various times, lived in the region. If Krause relocated there, he would have found a community sympathetic to his background and possibly supportive of his continued research. But tracking Krause beyond this point proved impossible. Argentine records from the 1950s-60s are incomplete, particularly for foreign residents. German communities in Bariloche and similar cities maintained tight social cohesion and didn't cooperate with outside investigators. If Krause lived there under a false identity, he could have remained undetected indefinitely. One tantalizing clue emerged in 2024. A retired Argentine federal policeman, Carlos Mendoza, contacted investigators after reading about the Austrian discovery. Mendoza, now 82, recalled a case from 1967 when he was a young officer in Bariloche. He'd been called to investigate an industrial accident at a private research facility outside the city. It was a small laboratory, Mendoza recounted in a 2024 interview. Privately owned, conducted chemical research, supposedly for agricultural applications. One of the workers had been injured in an explosion, a chemical accident. We responded, provided medical assistance, conducted a safety investigation. The facility director was an older German man, probably in his 60s. He spoke Spanish with a heavy accent, was very nervous about our presence, and clearly didn't want authorities examining his laboratory. He claimed the accident was minor, the injured worker would be fine, and there was no need for further investigation. We filed a report and left. The facility closed shortly after, within a month or two. When I returned to that location years later, the building was abandoned, completely empty. No equipment, no records, nothing indicating who'd operated it or what they'd been researching. Mendoza couldn't recall the facility director's name or any identifying details. But when shown photographs of Friedrich Krause from the 1940s and asked to imagine him 20 years older, Mendoza said, "It could be him. The age would be right, the nationality matches, but I can't be certain after 57 years." If this was Krause, it suggests he successfully established another research facility in Argentina and continued his work through at least 1967. The facility's closure after the accident might indicate he relocated yet again or finally retired from active research. No confirmed records of Friedrich Wilhelm Krause's death exist. Hermann Vogel, his false identity, has no death certificate in Austrian or German records. Argentine death records from the 1960s-90s are incomplete and weren't digitized. If Krause died in Argentina under a false name, the record might not exist in accessible archives. The most likely scenario, according to investigators, Krause lived in Argentina from 1954 until his death, probably in the 1980s or early 1990s when he would have been in his 80s. He likely continued research in some capacity, possibly at private facilities, possibly in collaboration with other expatriate scientists. He probably died of natural causes and was buried under a false identity, his true identity known only to a small circle of fellow expatriates. but this remains speculation. Without definitive evidence, Friedrich Wilhelm Krause's final years remain unknown. The discovery of Krause's facility and research journals raises profound questions about science, ethics, and historical accountability. His work, conducted outside any legal or ethical framework, produced genuine scientific insights. Several of his polymer compounds, once analyzed by modern chemists, showed properties matching materials developed decades later through legitimate research. His biochemical preservation techniques anticipated modern cryopreservation methods. His neurochemistry hypotheses, while speculative and unproven, asked questions that contemporary neuroscience continues exploring. Does scientifically valid work conducted through unethical means have value? Should modern science acknowledge or utilize findings from morally compromised research? These questions have been debated since the Nuremberg trials revealed the extent of Nazi medical experimentation. The consensus among modern ethicists is clear. Scientific knowledge gained through unethical means, human experimentation without consent, research conducted by individuals evading accountability for war crimes, should not be legitimized by incorporation into mainstream science. Even if the findings are valid, utilizing them would implicitly condone the methods used to obtain them. Dr. Anna Weiss, bioethics professor at University of Munich, stated in a 2024 paper analyzing the Krause case, "The research journals document genuine scientific work, but they also document apparent ethical violations, including probable unauthorized human experimentation. Modern science must reject these findings, not because they're scientifically invalid, but because accepting them would normalize research methods that violate fundamental human rights." The journals have been preserved in the Austrian Federal Archives, classified as historical documents available to researchers, but not as validated scientific literature. Several universities have incorporated the case into bioethics courses as an example of the tensions between scientific progress and ethical responsibility. The physical facility near Obertauern has been converted into a memorial and museum, open to the public in 2025. The site presents the history of the facility, the research conducted there, and the broader context of Nazi scientists who escaped prosecution. Educational programs emphasize the importance of ethical oversight in scientific research and the dangers of pursuing knowledge without moral constraints. Descendants of the 5 scientists who operated the facility have had mixed reactions. Hans Reichmann's daughter, now 88, stated in a 2024 interview, "I spent 78 years believing my father died a hero, fighting against Nazi oppression, hiding his Jewish heritage. Learning he actually escaped and lived in secret, conducting questionable research, forces me to completely reevaluate who he was." Elsa Vogel's nephew expressed anger. She had opportunities to surrender to Allied authorities, face whatever consequences were appropriate, and rebuild her life legitimately. Instead, she chose to hide and participate in unethical research. That was a moral failure, regardless of what scientific discoveries resulted. The case has prompted renewed efforts to identify and locate other potentially undiscovered Nazi-era facilities. Austria, Germany, and Argentina have initiated programs to survey remote areas, review unexplained structures in historical records, and investigate persistent rumors of hidden laboratories or bunkers. As of 2025, no additional facilities have been confirmed, but several sites are under investigation. The international community has also renewed focus on accountability for Nazi-era crimes. While active prosecutions are no longer possible, most individuals are deceased. Historical documentation and public acknowledgement of what occurred remain important. The Krause case demonstrates that Nazi officials not only escaped immediate justice, but continued problematic activities for years, sometimes decades, after the war. One of the case's most disturbing implications is the network of former Nazi scientists suggested by the correspondence found at the facility. If Kraus maintained contact with 8 or more other scientists living in hiding or under false identities, and if those scientists similarly continued research outside ethical frameworks, how much unethical scientific work was conducted in the post-war decades? Investigators are currently attempting to identify the correspondence referenced in Kraus's letters. Several names have been tentatively identified through handwriting analysis and historical cross-referencing. One correspondent, W.M., writing from Innsbruck in 1949, may have been Dr. Wilhelm Metzger, a biochemist who worked at Research Station Alpine 7 and was reported killed in April 1945. If he actually survived and continued research from another hidden location, that facility might still be undiscovered. Another correspondent, E.K., writing from Argentina in 1950, has been more difficult to identify. Several Nazi scientists with those initials emigrated to Argentina, but none definitively matches the letter's contents. This suggests the correspondent was using a pseudonym or false identity, further complicating identification efforts. The moral complexity of the case extends to Kraus's motivations. Was he a committed Nazi ideologue who continued pursuing racial or military objectives after the war? Or was he simply a scientist obsessed with research, willing to compromise ethics for knowledge, indifferent to politics? The journals suggest the latter. Kraus's entries rarely mention Nazi ideology or political goals. His focus was entirely on scientific questions, chemical reactions, biological processes, and experimental results. He appears to have viewed his research as independent of politics, valuable for its own sake, regardless of who conducted it or why. But this mindset itself is problematic. Science doesn't exist in a moral vacuum. Research methodology, subject consent, societal impact, these ethical considerations are inseparable from scientific validity. Kraus's belief that science exists independent of morality reflects a dangerous philosophy that has led to some of history's worst research abuses. The case also raises questions about the Allied authorities' post-war efforts to apprehend Nazi officials. Thousands of individuals disappeared during Germany's collapse and occupation. Allied intelligence services investigated, conducted searches, and pursued leads, but ultimately, many escaped. Were these failures due to insufficient resources, competing priorities during the early Cold War, or systemic inadequacies in the investigation processes? Historians analyzing declassified documents from the period note that Allied authorities faced overwhelming challenges: millions of displaced persons, destroyed records, chaotic conditions, and limited resources. Prioritizing which cases to pursue required difficult decisions. High-ranking officials like Adolf Eichmann and Joseph Mengele received intensive focus. Lower-ranking scientists like Kraus, without direct involvement in mass atrocities, were lower priority. This prioritization was pragmatic, but allowed individuals like Kraus to escape accountability. Had resources been allocated differently, had investigations been more thorough, had international cooperation been better coordinated, perhaps Kraus and others would have been apprehended before establishing hidden facilities and continuing problematic work. The Austrian discovery also prompted Germany to review its own post-war records. In 2024, the German Federal Archives initiated a project to cross-reference missing Nazi officials against post-war Austrian, Argentine, and Brazilian immigration records, looking for individuals who might have escaped under false identities. Preliminary results identified approximately 300 individuals whose fates remain uncertain, people listed as missing in 1945, but possibly living abroad under assumed names. Whether any of these individuals operated facilities similar to Kraus's remains unknown, but the possibility has prompted continued investigation and increased international cooperation on historical accountability efforts. In October 2024, 18 months after the Austrian facility's discovery, investigators held a press conference summarizing their findings. Dr. Stefan Müller, lead investigator for the Austrian Federal Criminal Police, stated, Friedrich Wilhelm Krause successfully escaped Allied justice in 1945, established a hidden research facility, operated it for 7 years, then relocated and likely continued his work in South America for decades. He died without facing accountability for his actions, and his research, while scientifically interesting, was conducted through methods that violate fundamental ethical principles. This case demonstrates that historical accountability efforts, while extensive, were incomplete. Individuals who should have faced justice escaped and lived free lives. We cannot prosecute Dr. Krause now. He's almost certainly deceased, but we can document what occurred, learn from these failures, and ensure modern oversight mechanisms prevent similar abuses. The facility near Obertauern, sealed for 71 years, has become a memorial to the complexities of post-war justice and the dangers of science without ethics. Visitors can tour the underground chambers, see the preserved laboratory equipment, and read excerpts from Krause's journals. Educational materials emphasize the importance of ethical oversight, informed consent, and accountability in scientific research. The research journals themselves remain controversial. Scientists have reviewed them, acknowledged the technical competence they demonstrate, but categorically rejected incorporating findings obtained through unethical means into legitimate scientific literature. The journals stand as historical documents, evidence of what occurred, but not as valid contributions to scientific knowledge. For the families of Krause's collaborators, the discovery brought painful revelations. Relatives who believed their family members died heroically or tragically during the war learned they actually survived, chose deception over accountability, and participated in questionable research. These revelations have forced difficult reevaluations of family histories and personal identities. For historians, the case provides valuable insights into the post-war period, how Nazi officials escaped, where they went, what they did, and how they evaded justice for decades. The documentation recovered from the facility fills gaps in historical understanding and raises new questions about the extent of informal Nazi networks in the post-war decades. For ethicists, the case reinforces fundamental principles. Scientific research must be conducted within ethical frameworks. Knowledge gained through rights violations cannot be legitimized, and accountability for past abuses remains important regardless of time elapsed. Friedrich Wilhelm Krause built an engineering marvel in the Austrian Alps. He conducted scientifically sophisticated research for nearly a decade in complete secrecy. He evaded capture, created a successful false identity, and likely died peacefully in old age. From a purely technical perspective, his achievements were remarkable. But he did all this while evading accountability for his role in Nazi Germany's military research apparatus, conducting experiments that appear to have violated human rights, and refusing to face justice for his actions. Whatever scientific insights his work produced, they came at an ethical cost that cannot be justified. The facility near Obertauern stands as a reminder. Sometimes brilliant minds use their abilities not for humanity's benefit, but for their own purposes, regardless of moral cost. And sometimes, the mountains keep secrets for 8 decades before finally revealing the truth. The Austrian Alps,